I got a couple of late round quarterbacks that have some QB1 upside. So if you're thinking about putting at the quarterback position earlier in the rounds, you can stack up at the other positions. These guys will be perfect candidates to be drafting this summer. Okay, now hear me out. Will Levis is a guy that I believe can touch low-end QB1 upside just based on the situation around him right now. You have Brian Callahan that is familiar with an offense with under Zach Taylor with the Bengals, that he brings over Tyler Boyd, which is the most reliable third down wide receiver they had over there in Cincinnati. Looking at Tyler Boyd in this offense is what's going to keep these drives alive. Then you bring in a guy like Calvin Ridley while already still having DeAndre Hopkins. This is going to be a very vertical attack offense where you're going to have to worry about DeAndre Hopkins, who's still a reliable route runner, to be able to create separation and make all the difficult catches. You have Calvin Ridley, who is fast as lightning, that could stretch the field and shown that he could be a dynamic wide receiver all throughout the route tree. Last season, the problem was he wasn't being utilized more so than Brian Callahan, basically comparing him how he's going to be utilized like Jamar Chase. This means there's going to be a lot of motion in the offense before snap. It's going to be a lot of him getting targeted in that seam instead of being focused only outside the numbers running a go route. This is going to be a Calvin Ridley that we've known and love, more so utilize how he was in Atlanta. I just feel as though this offense is a completely different offense what it was last season, being that there was no real supporting cast around DeAndre Hopkins and Will Levis. And not to mention, the dude was sacked 41 times in the small sample size that we saw, Will Levis as a starter, which started in week 8. But from week 8 and on, he was actually tied second with Dak Prescott in attempts of 20 plus yards. So again, this is going to be a vertical attack where I think a lot of these fantasy points are going to come in chunks, and you don't want to miss out on such great value on a guy that is set up for success in this new offense under Brian Callahan. So Will Levis is a guy that you should be targeting late in those drafts that has some QB1 upside. Man, the value on Matthew Stafford is crazy to me, man. He is going so late in drafts where I'm okay and comfortable punting on quarterback in those early rounds where I don't feel like paying the high price for those guys, when I could just get a guy like Matthew Stafford who has displayed QB1 in this Sean McVay system once before. Now, we're looking at last season, man. It's a little wonky when we're looking at Matthew Stafford's numbers, but when we look at him in a healthy Rams offense, he is obviously a top 5 quarterback. You started the season off without Cooper Kupp. In the middle of the season, you lost Kyren Williams, which took a hit with the rushing production. Then in week 12, when all the Avengers assembled again, where you have Puka Nacua, Kyren Williams, and Cooper Kupp healthy on the team with Matthew Stafford back healthy as well, Matthew Stafford led the NFL in passing yards per game with 284, and he finished from week 12 on as a QB5. Now, we're looking at Matthew Stafford as a potential guy to average 20 fantasy points per game that we're getting in the 13th, 14th round, if not later. He is once forgotten. Everybody thinks he's the old man in the club, but it's fine. He's still going out there, getting dances, buying everybody the drinks, and having a good time in LA, leading us back to a Super Bowl. I'll be first to say this is a huge gamble here, but I'm willing to roll the dice in some of my leagues on a low-end QB1 and DeShaun Watson, who's going in the 12th round. Now, we look at the small sample size last season, and we take away week 7, where he didn't play too much. The dude averaged 18 fantasy points per game. So that low-end QB1 upside is still there for you in the 12th round. But again, it's a huge gamble being with his injury history. But if we look at the dynamic of this offense, it's the best supporting cast he has had in a very long time. So I'm looking at DeShaun Watson as a guy that you can go ahead and take that gamble on in the back end of those rounds with a solid core already at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, whatever you went in those early rounds before the 12th round or whatever round he goes in the late rounds. I feel like DeShaun Watson could be a serviceable week-to-week guy looking at last season in a small sample size. It did not end up the way it wanted to, but you add Jerry Jeudy, who's a guy that can target separate, and you can be relied on. You're looking at David Njoku, who you're happy that his production is taking an ascending rise forward, and you're hoping that DeShaun Watson can utilize his offense and take a step forward himself and be a QB1 for a lot of fantasy rosters this year. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. The reason why Russell Wilson's going in the 18th round or his ADP is in the late rounds is because of the boot out of Denver. Now, we're looking at this total situation. Look at the numbers. They're not terrible. 26 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. There could be a lot worse situations here where Russell Wilson could have just been on his decline to where we compare him to Zach Wilson and the rest of the company. Now, we're looking at this offense that he has around him now. The tools are there. He has the supporting cast in George Pickens and Roman Wilson, who's honestly obviously been making some noise in training camp, which is great. Also, a two-punch running back room where you have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, where I think Arthur Smith will be able to have his offense the way it's supposed to have been seen, I would say, because the Falcons, he's always a quarterback away where he had all the tools. And now you have Russell Wilson, who's a polished veteran quarterback that I think can come in and execute this, because the dude finished last season with 17 fantasy points per game. To me, that is low-end QB1 to where he has the ceiling that he can look at and hit that 18, 19 to 20 fantasy points per game if this offense is going to be humming the way that Arthur Smith wants it to hum. Now, looking at him in the 18th round, it is free money here. There's not much risk there, but if you're taking him as your QB1, which this video is, I feel real comfortable saying, hey, I stacked up at other positions. I'm good to go there, and I'm going to take this gamble with Russell Wilson as my QB1. High risk here, but very, very high reward if he ends up hitting. So this wraps up another great episode of RotoBaller Fantasy Sports YouTube channel. Please make sure you guys like and subscribe. And you guys should head over to the website, rotoballer.com, and sign up today and get a subscription and get 10% off when you use my promo code FIRE. And you guys can follow me on Real Deal Fantasy on all social media platforms. Until next time.